I'll just be frank, super psyched about our next panel, which features 4 Columbia learners. We have spent today talking about what it means to reimagine teaching and learning in the age of AI. And we've heard from deans, we have heard from faculty members, we have heard from professionals in the world about workplace readiness for students. We had a fantastic keynote speaker who gave us national bird's eye view data. And now we have what I would consider perhaps the strongest stakeholder in all of these decisions, students of our great institution. And so we have a fairly open forum today. We have a couple of questions that are prepared. I'll ask in a moment that they introduce themselves. And we'll talk through some questions, but while the questions and the introductions are happening, please do scan the QR code and submit questions. And we struck a deal before we all came on stage today, that we were going to be really, really honest about what AI is like in our classes, as learners, how it has helped us, what it's confusing in our classes, what do we wish faculty knew about AI, but we all agreed we're not gonna use any names, right? No names. So names to protect everybody. And that way, we'll be able to have really frank conversations about how AI is functioning in the lives of these 4 learners. Perhaps we can extrapolate from those experiences and draw some connections to the conversations we've had today. So, without further ado, I'll introduce myself to those of you who don't know. My name is Amanda Irvin. I am the Executive Director of Columbia's Center for Teaching and Learning. And we are offering this fantastic program today in partnership with the Columbia Data Science Institute, Columbia Engineering, the Columbia Alliance Program, and Teachers College. And I am joined today by 4 students who will share their names, their majors, how long they've been at Columbia, sort of what year you're in, and then we will dive into some questions. So please.
Hi, my name is Pranati Sadhu. I started my master's at Columbia this year. I'm studying quantitative methods and data science.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephany Andrade. I am a Teachers College student, and I'm currently in the Teaching of English program. I recently started in September, so I've been here about a year.
Hello, my name is Tonydin Ramos. I am a 3rd year. I transferred in about last semester, so it's my 2nd semester currently, and I am majoring in psychology.
Hi, my name is Jeanne, Roger-Encoignard. I'm a French student in a dual degree between Columbia and Sciences Po, which is a French school. So I'm a junior, but this is my 1st year at Columbia, and I'm studying political science and human rights.
Fantastic, thank you. So, to kick us off, maybe we could just start with a general question about AI and the ways you've engaged with it as students. How has it helped your learning, or how do you feel like it might have hindered your learning? And to the degree that you could share examples with us, we would love it. Who would like to start? Please.
So English is a language that I still have a bit of a finicky relationship with. And though I personally don't use AI all that much, specifically out of environmental reasons and concerns and all that, I do know a lot of international students who use AI to help translate what their course materials are in their own native language, to the point where when I don't understand it, I've had professors actually recommend to use AI, which was surprising to me, considering some very strict policies against it in school.
Are there some professors you imagine who would consider that cheating?
Professors bring up the concern of AI, even if it is giving you like a rundown of the subject matter, it is not in the professor's own words. So it could be misconstruing, like, for example, I'm taking sociology courses. That's a major thing of like, okay, it's interpretative. There's like a big portion of it that is understanding of your personal understanding of the text of what people are saying. So that is a concern that has been brought up.
Okay, great. Who would like to go next? Please.
I think I take on an interesting perspective as a student who is also teaching. I have used AI as a student and an educator. And I think I've really come to understand AI as a tool, right? When I'm thinking about when I was in elementary school and educators would say, like, don't use a calculator, right? Don't use Google search engines, Google Translate. AI is a tool that is entering this world that we are trying to learn, right? And working with high school students and during my undergraduate career working with undergraduate students, I've really seen the importance of learning how to use tools that are that you have access to specifically within higher education, right? Like you're not going to hand a fifth grader a graphing calculator and tell them use this to do 2 + 2. But you might do that. You might use a graphing calculator in your chemistry class, in your geometry class. But these are things that you have to learn how to use, when to use, to be able to use them well in a way that is beneficial to you and those around you. So in my own experience, I am in the teaching of English program, so I'm not only an educator and a practitioner, but I'm also doing my own research. So in my own history, I've used AI for lesson planning to see if there are any other practices that I can include to make my lesson more universally designed for students. I've also used it in my personal research to search up an author, right? An author can I get a list of authors that are adjacent to this author that would help my research or my research question. But I have worked with high school students that kind of just jump into AI and use it to write a complete essay, as we've seen. But yeah.
I'm currently studying data science, so I think AI has actually played such a beneficial role. I came from a business background, so I was not as confident going into a data science background just because of how technically dense it was. But with AI, I feel like it has given me the chance to use it like a tutor that doesn't get frustrated. That's kind of a metaphor I like using. I have so many questions about so many little terms, and there's things that even my teachers wouldn't be able to answer just because it's such a nuanced question. But the way that during a lecture I have Claude or ChatGPT on the side where I'm just asking it my small little questions so I could better engage in my lectures is something I've seen it really help me with. I also feel like I tutor, like Stephany was saying, with teaching, and there are times where I'm trying to explain something to a student, but I'm not able to find the words or find an analogy. And because AI just is such a quick thinker, it helps me take those complicated thoughts and put it into simpler words. And it also has helped me with like a lot of little monotonous things, like with coding. Sometimes writing a function that I've written and I understand how it works, I know that might take me a lot of time, for example, with my senior thesis. But using things like Claude Code, I'm able to get that baseline code written down, and then I can go in and debug it. So I'm still applying my skills and I'm applying my knowledge, but it's more of a crutch to help me save time and really focus my thinking where I feel like it could shine.
Thank you. Please.
As political science students, AI is prohibited in most of my classes because political science is about writing essays and it's about thinking. And so if you're using AI for that, I mean, you're not actually learning anything. So in most of my classes, I try not to use AI, even though it's still useful. I mostly use it when I don't understand something, for example, or when I have to study. I feel like AI can be a good help because you can ask more, you can deepen certain topics that you want to learn more about. You can also ask for sources, and it's super efficient to find more sources and more readings if you want to learn more about certain topics. So as a student, I feel like it's important to moderate the way you use AI because it can also make you super lazy. I think everyone has gone through that. I mean, you start using it and you feel like you can't function without it anymore. So I think it's it has to be controlled, but it's super useful, even though in my major, for example, I feel like it's not the one in which you're supposed to use AI the most. Yeah.
Thank you. When you are in your classes, and I imagine, depending on your degree program and the level, that you're probably navigating a couple of different classes at once. So you have a range of perspectives, especially at this point in your career as learners. What are things that you wish, from your perspective, and you talked a lot about the ways that AI has helped you or the ways that you have avoided AI, what are things that you wish faculty better understood about AI and the ways that you interact with it, or the ways, or it could even extend to like things that you wish faculty were incorporating around AI in their curriculum? You can interpret this broadly, but what are things that you wish faculty understood about AI? Please.
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, especially when understanding that AI is new within the realm of education right now. But I think it's really important that instructors and professors understand their relationship with students in the classroom, not just as an instructor, but also as a learner, right? If you are against using AI within the classroom, why is that? Right? What is the explanation behind that besides what you were given as a policy by the classroom? If you are pro AI, what is that reason? How have you used it within your practice? How do you suggest using it within the classroom? One of the best experiences I've had with AI is within a humanities classroom. We were prompted to have an assignment specifically on using AI. And it really included, searching up, using different AI platforms. We use Claude, we use ChatGPT, and understanding the differences between all AI sources. Claude might be better for data analysis, right? Python is going to be very pro-code, whereas ChatGPT has been used for more of a analytical comprehension mode. So understanding, really allowing that to be a learning process for yourself and your students to understand what are the pros and cons of using this as a tool, right? Not just proposing that this is something that we are not allowed to use in the classroom or that we are allowed to use in the classroom. Why? Right, as students, especially Columbia students, a lot of our students are coming into this education space with curiosity, with questions. And as professors, I think that there is almost a duty to engage with your students as colleagues to understand whether or not this is something that can be used in the classroom, and understanding what that classroom social contract is, right? How can we, with this specific group of students that you have this semester, how can it be used? Should it be used? It might be different from a different semester for the same course with different students.
Thank you.
Something I really believe in is I really wish that faculty would understand that we aren't using AI to stop thinking or to take the easy route. A lot of times in my classes, I feel like I get scared when I pull out my ChatGPT on the side because I don't want my professor to think I'm not interested. But for me, a lot of times it's a support. It's like a crutch to ask those silly questions that I'm not able to ask on the spot because there are so many other students. Or in a classroom of 30 students where we're given 50 minutes to learn a pretty hefty amount of material, I don't want to waste the professor's time asking all my little questions, especially when I am when I can be very curious about things. So for me, AI is to honestly expand my thinking and go deeper into a subject where I'm trying to also be respectful of people's time. I want to keep thinking in a way.
Okay, all right, yeah.
And as someone who is personally doesn't want to use AI, is against AI, I guess, in a sense. AI in and of itself as a technology is very intrusive into our lives, to the point where, as a working student also, if anyone knows what Lionshare is, in their partnership with Handshake, it's where you go to find work, essentially. They did a partnership, and it was in my school email, it was blasted to me, of Google AI Pro, a free subscription. That was the tagline being, "Start the school year strong." We're being marketed AI. It's not just the students being oh, I'm going to use this to undercut my education with how expensive tuition is. It's also a part of it being pushed into our faces to the point where sometimes I'll try to use a search engine and I'll have to look at that AI overview that I don't want to see, which has muddled information for me personally for when I'm doing research. And I just have to ignore it and just like, it just stays there. And you just have to deal with it. Part of it is, I think there's like this perspective of like students are doing this intentionally, or like they go out of their way to do this, or like, oh, they want to use AI because it's easier, because it's better. It's like, some of us don't, and it's just shoved in your face to the point where you just have to bear with it. So it's also that.
Thank you.
I think that's something important is that even though AI exists, it's important to maintain like confidence between teachers and students. Like if we tell you that we didn't use AI, even though the tracker may say, oh, he used AI for 50% of the essay, maybe we actually didn't use it and the tracker is wrong. I feel like that's an important issue too because it can affect the atmosphere of a whole class and like how like the whole semester, for example, is going to be. For example, I have so many of my friends at Columbia who have been accused of using AI because trackers said that they did, even though I know, for example, that they didn't because I worked with them or for any other reason. And so I feel like that's another danger. That's like, it can also affect the relationship between teachers and students, which shouldn't be the case because I feel like we should believe each other more than believing a tracker that says that we are lying.
One of our core subjects is writing. Like you have to take a class specifically from Columbia for how to write in the way that Columbia wants. And I know a lot of international students who, because we're taught English in a very specific way, it doesn't come as naturally. Like you're taught like, okay, you know, the formation of sentence, the structure, the words to use. And that is flagged as AI a lot. So it's been a big issue with international students that we have to kind of finick our way around like how we are used to writing English because it comes off as AI. Like it is a big issue to the point where we'll kind of share tips of like, hey, don't use M dashes, stuff like that, which, you know, giveaways for AI supposedly. But for us, it's just like, okay, this is just what we were told to do, and now we just have to subvert that intentionally, or else that's that.
As someone who loves an M dash, I heard that, and I was also heartbroken. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I think it's also essential to understand what my other colleagues have said already is understanding that what is the reason why your students are using AI within a class without your facilitation? There is understanding education and understanding students within their roles at an Ivy League institution. How does pressure play into the role of the use of AI? How does how do you as an educator at the front of the classroom, what is your positionality when you are interacting with a student who has potentially been tracked to have used AI, right? How does grading affect the curiosity of a student and the pure engagement with learning and the love for learning, right? As an educator now within the high school classroom, I see a loss of love for learning, right? Because of the pressures of, I need to get an A. How do I get an A? ChatGPT and Grammarly will show me, if I give them my rubric, that this is technically what looks like an A. How do we move away from that in our classroom to prompt curiosity, to prompt trust as a professor, as an instructor with our students, to bring back curiosity into the classroom and being okay with failing and being okay with not doing what is deemed as correct, right? It's in a sense, AI has brought out the reality of the systemic oppression of, you know, academia, of having to be perfect, right? Where, as you all may know as researchers, it's not perfect. It's not. You go through so many drafts of research papers, so many drafts of proposals, that a lot of students think that AI is the way that this is how I will get here, because AI is a computer and it will tell me how to get there. So really, I think when using AI, it is about the trust and the respect that you develop within your classroom. How is that shared? What is the positionality of your students, and what is your positionality within the classroom, and how do you bring to it, and what do you take away from it?
One of the really really interesting things that I hear happening as someone who's been able to benefit from the long view of our conversations today is that you, without knowing, have systematically sort of gone through and debunked some of the assumptions that we might have been collectively making in this space until right now. And I think that we were doing so with the understanding that we were painting with broad strokes, right? So the idea that all students are using AI, right? And you are saying that that is not the case, right? That you make the conscientious choice not to, or that if you are using AI, it's to circumvent teaching or thinking, right? But really, you're trying to enhance your teaching, your learning, and you're curious, and AI hasn't prevented you from being curious. Or this idea that you're seeking out AI tools when really they are being marketed to you, and they're being marketed to you in a big way, and that and we've known that communication is key. And one thing that you haven't talked about directly, but that I'm really curious to hear your take on this, is we earlier today had a keynote speaker who shared some data at a very national level. And there were this survey that was conducted at the end of last year, and the results were published this January, and it shared, I guess the general sense was like the reasons students use AI, right? And that some of them were very surprising and are in line with what you were saying, right? That they are there for folks who are learning English, and they've been encouraged by faculty to use AI tools or to answer questions or help them develop an outline for a paper. But some of them were about, I'll call it human connection or relationships. And the reason I'm isolating these ideas is because learning is relational, right? In fact, the time that we spend together in person, like we are right now, is perhaps the most valuable thing that we can do when it comes to exchanging ideas. But that comes at a high cost. And you were saying, like, you've got 50 minutes, right? You've got 50 minutes, and there are 30 other students in the room, and you don't want to monopolize someone's time. And I will just tip my hand and show my age a little bit. Back in the olden days, when I was in college, we had the internet. But if I had a question, I really had to go to office hours, right? There wasn't really a ChatGPT. So I had to go and develop this connection and this relationship. And I'm not assuming that AI is preventing that, but I am curious what you see either in your own use or among your peers. If there are these emerging studies that students are using AI to offload emotional connection or relational learning, and that AI is becoming a replacement for that because it's so much easier to ask AI and get answers to your question than it would be to turn to a colleague or go to office hours. What do you think about that? Yeah, here and then there.
I think with social media especially, and like with the media in general, there's a fear of shame, there's a fear of being judged. And that's where I see AI's role come in. And I've personally experienced it where there's times where I'm having certain feelings and it's like, I don't really want to burden my friends. I don't want to, I've like gone over, and it's like beating a dead horse, as they say. Like, I've really gone through the same fear or like the same situation multiple times. And I'm like, do I talk to my friend and again, like strengthen that human connection, or is it a burden for them? And can't I just ask AI, dump it, and move on? But truly, like you said, I think that human connection, it brings such a different outlook because of the emotion and just like sharing that emotion and feeling that empathy from your peer, from your friend. But I think it's hard because in this day and age, there is just so much judgment and there's just so much stigma with like how you feel. And like, I think I see it with LinkedIn, like people just being so confident all the time. When you're someone that's insecure, you end up projecting in a way. And so you end up turning to AI, and I think that's just such a complicated field to navigate because it does help some people that feel so insecure, like build their confidence, but then also they lose the aspect of like pushing themselves and like making that emotional human connection that they're not gonna get with a robot.
LinkedIn makes me insecure as well.
Very.
I understand. You were gonna say something.
worse. I believe that AI is the ultimate tool of convenience. You can get the same thing with just searching something up on the internet, but it's faster and more customized. And I think both for interpersonal relationships and for academia, that is a big issue because it's essentially just affirmation to the max. It will not just like, again, you won't get judged as harshly as if you're talking to a person. Let's be like, you're okay, but actually like this. It just reinforces you. And that's a big fear as someone who's studying psychology, where I hear friends saying like, I dealt with this by talking to my friend who's an AI chatbot, and that is terrifying because you won't get feedback. It just affirms what you say. That's the function of it. It's not thinking. It's a LLM. It's a learning language model. It's just repeating and saying what it thinks is correct. It's like text auto-generate to like the nth level. You're not getting real feedback. You're just getting what is the correct next sentence to whatever you prompted it with. And so that is something that I worry about a lot, is that replacement. Even if it's just like talking to a professor, again, like building up that camaraderie, or like learning from a human being who has like spent time instead of a database that can be prone to being flawed. Like a lot of learning in academia is opinion and thought and formation of thought. It's not the correct way. There's a certain correct way of like thinking. It's, okay, how do you thinking? Do you get like an accurate representation of what you're trying to achieve? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess with this question, I asked the question to you all, how is this reflective of the human condition right now, right? Like, how is this reflective to, we have, I'm sure a lot of you take the subway, we see the AI friends. That is very concerning, I will say, but I think it's also something to say about AI as a form of capitalism, right? Like, in what ways can it serve as a tool? But then in what ways is AI being, as you mentioned, shoved down our throats in ways that aren't beneficial to us as students and as learners? But I would also say that it's, when it comes to the personal exchange of ideas, as I mentioned before, how is this reflective of the human condition, right? What is prompting your students to, instead of going to office hours, as someone who holds office hours myself, a lot of you might know this, students aren't coming to office hours. Students aren't coming to in-person events. And this has changed after COVID and the whole concept of the loss of literacy and moving virtually. Everyone wants everything over Zoom, right? How is this reflective of your teaching practices, right? How are you being welcoming within the classroom? Are office hours, what is making your students scared of office hours, right? You might not be scary wearing a mask, like a Halloween mask, right? But sometimes TAs or interacting with other students, especially within the realms of the ivory tower, are very scary to students, especially speaking on behalf of first generation students. I'm first generation, I'm Latina, I have indigenous identities and I'm proud of those identities. But how are we questioning how students have to go out of their way to be able to learn? And how are we as professors and educators inviting students and to the knowing that it is okay to be wrong, it is okay to question, and it is okay to learn?
Thank you. Any thoughts?
Maybe to try to see the positive side of it. I feel like for the example of office hours, AI also allows students to have easy answers easily, and so not actually going to office hours for nothing. I mean, the easy answers are answered by AI. However, I don't think AI can ever be a total replacement of a teacher because, for example, if you have a final paper to write, of course you're going to ask to your teacher because, I mean, you know that AI is going to answer in a way that's not the way your teacher is actually thinking. And I think most of us are conscious of it and are still going to come to office hours, but just with like broader questions or questions that AI cannot actually answer to. So I think that's going to maybe change the frequency of office hours or the way they are used, or maybe students are just going to come to ask questions about your career or papers you have written about, or but I don't think it's going to completely like replace the teacher-student relationship.
one thing I've like really gained from when I go to office hours is the experiential learning, and that's something you don't get with AI, because AI is very information-based, but it lacks experience. So I think when I interact with the teacher and they lead with experiences and emotions, it makes me a lot more motivated to just go in person and work with them directly and build that relationship.
So I'm going to turn to questions from our audience, of which there are many, which is fantastic. Please do continue to add them, and remember you can upvote, which helps me prioritize things. There's a question, since we're talking about AI versus in-person conversation, right? Whether it be with your classmates or going to office hours, which research demonstrates time and time again, office hours, according to students, is kind of scary. That's not new. That's not a Gen Z thing. That is across the board something that we've known for a long time. And so one of the questions that has come in is, in the classes, in your experience as learners, what have you seen, or what do you believe faculty could do to foster or nurture a classroom community about AI, or in general, to build rapport, trust, and belonging, right? So some of you have been talking about transparency, asking faculty to share their why, but what would help you feel like, and maybe another way to phrase this is, we were all talking beforehand about the ideas that faculty should partner with their students when it comes to figuring out AI. What does a partnership look like? What might faculty do to create a welcoming classroom climate where you feel like you can partner to think about what's the appropriate way to use AI in this space?
I think that, a big part of this is being transparent with the idea that making mistakes is human, right? I had a professor, I really enjoyed their class, and one of the things that they would do as a do now when we entered this lecture was have a question that we would all write about related to the readings, and then they would ask ChatGPT what ChatGPT thought. And we would enter a discussion as to whether or not we agreed with the answer given by ChatGPT. But also understanding that comes with making mistakes, right? Like sometimes my professor would mistype something and ChatGPT would give him a recipe for some reason. So being in those scenarios, in those settings where learning can be fun, right? Learning can be funny. Learning can be a place for dialogue and community, whereas one-to-one AI is very singling. It's very individual. But how to bring that into the classroom, not necessarily in an assignment or not necessarily in a policy in your syllabus, but also just, playing around with it. I had another professor who would talk about how ChatGPT kind of messed up their week because they asked for a meal plan and the meal plan did not go the way that they thought it would. And we really related to that because as undergraduate students who survive on snacks and dining hall plans, it was nice to connect with a professor that was currently struggling through their meal plan. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. What are some other things? So this idea of using AI together, I think is great. One of the challenges that we've discussed today is we are responsible when we use the output of an AI. We then assume responsibility for that output. But as novices in a field, you might not have the expertise to evaluate that output. But when you use it as a community, then you have the benefit of walking through with an expert to say, yes, this is all right, and here is a common misconception, and I understand why the AI said that, but here's why it's not right. And that, I think, could be really interesting. Hold on just a second, please. Go ahead.
One thing that I had a professor do that I really thought was interesting was he said, answer the question, and then use AI to answer the question and compare those outputs. Because at the end of the day, I think when I have a professor that goes in directly and says, no AI, like AI is banned, unfortunately, with how we all are, we are gonna, regardless, we will wanna use AI. Because that's a tool we have, and with the way we are like going through with technology, and technology is evolving, I think like there's no other world where like AI is going to be taken down for good. So we're going to have to learn to coexist with it. But I think understanding and trying to like, in a way, see how AI contradicts your thinking and also complements your thinking, like thinking about both sides. That was something that I think it really helped with, because it also makes you think. And I think a teacher wants you to think. They want you to explore and they want you to understand a concept. So being like, yes, use AI, but also try it yourself and see where you're comparing. See, okay, what gaps are there? Maybe there's something you can learn from doing that. Maybe there's something you're missing that you weren't able to understand from what we learned.
We do want you to think, it's true. Yes.
I am in some classes and have been in some classes where professors strictly have a no AI policy, but it's a big lecture class and I usually sit near the back so I could like see the projector straight in my face. And more often than not, I'll just like look down, it's like, you can see like the logo, it's like, that's ChatGPT, oh, that's AI. So even if you put like a strict rule, you're only leaving the students with two options, use it or don't use it. It's not, if you don't guide them along, or at least make them understand why they shouldn't use it, or like what's the benefit of, okay, maybe do this yourself. They're just gonna end up doing it anyway because you can't look at every single user case scenario. Not to say that it's good that it is that way, but it is a reality. And the reality is that AI is in the world. It's hard to avoid it. Again, it's a very intrusive technology. Even if you don't want to use it, at some point you're gonna stumble upon it. So I think part of it is addressing that it is a thing in the world, especially in work. There's a lot of workplaces nowadays where we're gonna go out into the workforce. What are we doing here at the school? We're learning to hopefully get a job someday in that piece of paper. So when we're entering a workforce and we're like, put all of this like stringent rules of like, okay, don't use AI in your education, yada, yada. Then suddenly you're pushed into a position where you're expected by higher ups to use AI. It kind of leaves you disarmed in a certain sense of like knowing how to handle it. And it's also a case of accessibility. It's like cell phones. Everyone assumes that everyone has a cell phone. Not everyone has a cell phone or access to the internet or Wi-Fi, but it is still there and something to take into consideration, even if people aren't using it, even if there are people who don't use it or can't specifically. It's still something to think about and to actively acknowledge, pretending as if it doesn't exist or won't have an impact if we just ignore it or like cut it to the side, like just don't do it. It's not gonna go away. It's still just gonna be there lingering, and at some point, the technology is just getting better and better exponentially, and we're just gonna be stuck in a position where it's outpacing any guidelines or rules that are so stringent unless we adapt them or at least acknowledge and take it into consideration.
Thank you. We'll go to Jeanne and then back to Stephany.
I think it's important for students to actually learn how to use AI because in the end, I think during our careers, we're going to have to use them. Because like, for example, during internships, I've observed people using AI, and so I know that I will have to use it. So I don't think banning AI from classes is useful in any way. I feel like we just have to learn how to use it and how not to use it. And I think that's something that can be interesting in classes to show students that you should not use AI in certain ways is actually showing it, like, there are so many studies that show how it affects your brain, how it affects your capabilities of actually thinking, and how it makes you dumb in the end. And that's actually something I saw during a class this year, and I've used AI a lot less since then, because you just realize that, oh, it's not just a feeling that I'm more lazy than I was before, it's facts. It's actually like damaging my brain, damaging my capacity of thinking by myself. And I think that's a way to actually show your students that you're not just against AI, but that's for themselves, that you're asking them not to use it. And I think that's a better way to make them realize that it's not a great idea to use AI all the time than just banning it, actually showing that it's for themselves that you're doing it.
Stephany?
I think it's also about looking beyond Columbia, right? Like, what do you want your 30-year-old undergraduate student after Columbia, how do you want them to be able to use AI? If we're not teaching how to use AI, you know, they're going to be using it as a search engine, right? Like at the University of Pittsburgh during my undergraduate career, I worked at the Center for Teaching and Learning there, and I consulted a lot of professors. And one of the professors really, one of their first lessons that they would have with any class is teaching the difference between when you should use ChatGPT versus a search engine. I mean, you brought up a great point on the environmental factors of AI, right? A lot of students and just adults, period, are using AI to ask what day of the week it is, right? Like that is probably not the most efficient way to use AI, but you can use a search engine for that. You can use a search engine to ask where Columbia is located, right? But also, I think it also comes to reflecting on yourself. I consulted a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, let's call him John Doe, who really was against AI. 100% against AI, against it in the syllabus, against it in the classroom, had been referred to us because a lot of students were being reported for using AI. And when looking through their modules and their Canvas courseworks, I think is what it's called here, I looked at this professor and I was like, John Doe, your syllabus is 100% AI. Like you have taken this syllabus from a different professor, have not changed anything. And it shows, your care shows within the classroom, right? Like if at the end of your syllabus it says this syllabus was taken from the professor last semester and there has been nothing been edited, your students are going to be prompted to do the same, right? The care that you give is the care that you receive. So when students are collaborating within your classroom or actually interested in the classroom, it comes from a place of care, right? What care are you giving within the work that you assign, within the posts that you make, within how much time you put into your courseworks? That shows to students, and we are very, I think it just really shows.
So we have some interesting questions coming in through the, buckle up everyone, because I'm about to ask a doozy. So this is really interesting, and we are tiptoeing our way, I think, into faculty use of AI, which we spent a lot of time talking about student use of AI, and there's a question that's been upvoted many times asking how you feel about the use of AI in grading and assignment feedback. So, you know what, I could offer more context, but I'm just gonna stop there. What do you think about the use of AI when it comes to grading the work that you submit and providing feedback? Yeah?
I think it's really complicated, to say the least.
So diplomatic.
Because
Jeanne?
For example, when I got into Columbia, I was so happy because of the teachers that I was gonna get. And I'm like, oh, these people are incredible, I'm gonna learn so much from them. And if they start correcting my papers through AI, I feel like I would lose a lot of, as you said, their experience and the benefit of having those incredible teachers would be just lost because of the use of AI and no personal opinion in a correction. And also I feel like something that AI won't do as well is that a teacher can also adapt its correction compared to other students or compared to how he thinks the paper was like hard to do, easier. I think that could be lost, and that wouldn't be great for students or for the class in general.
So, thank you. Just to complicate, I know we have more responses, but just to complicate it, what if AI produces the first round of feedback, but then your faculty member goes through and makes adjustments and corrections and adds things to it? So it's sort of like you do it once and have the AI do it and then compare. What do you think about something like that? Yeah.
I think it really is dependent on, like, obviously there is professors have a lot to do, right? Students have a lot to do. And I think the way that I've kind of looked at this is AI goes both ways. Like, how do you use it as a tool, right? But then how has AI prompted us to change the way that we look at the classroom, right? One of my like big things right now is mini essays. Like, I never knew how important mini essays are to understanding concepts. What I would say is, I think that the first round of feedback, if anything, is the most important, right? If you are using AI, maybe the second round of feedback, third round of feedback, but then there's also peer review, right? There's peer-to-peer feedback, and how you are facilitating that and how you are teaching students to be able to collaborate with each other, to give each other feedback. And how are you facilitating that in a way that is productive, right? With AI and grading as a tool, I think I would mostly use it as, grade percentages. How should I grade this compared to the other student based on my feedback? I think a lot of professors I've worked with have had difficulty understanding the ranges, rubrics, how to discern an A from an A minus. Kind of using that as an explanation, using AI as an explanation to understand and understand your thoughts between what makes a paper or an assignment an A versus an A minus. But I do really think, especially when it comes to comments or feedback, first round of feedback is the most important.
In the case of it being used in the first pass, my worry is that it would influence how the grader is grading. Mm-hmm. Like, they might say something, like see something that the chatbot spits out and be like, okay, so I'll think about that when they weren't thinking about it in the first place, or maybe even skip over critiques that they would have because the chatbot didn't mention it first, and like, oh, it went over everything. Like, one way or another, it will influence how they think, or at least reference the paper one way or another. Also, like, on the whole general ideas, like, I think all four of us know how expensive tuition is. It feels kind of, it feels a bit cheaped out if it's like, okay, I could just get a chatbot to grade my paper and it's the same thing, instead of having the professor's expertise. So at least some involvement of the person that we're learning from, or that we want to learn from, or we reference. It would be like, it's a big part of why we're here. We're not just here because of, cool building. It's like, no, it's like we're here for the expertise of the people that we trust, we are learning from, that they know what they're doing, and that what we're learning here is important from the person that we're learning from, because we're learning from these people. It's,
yeah, totally. Okay, this is probably, maybe, our final question. And this has come up quite a bit in all of the responses and questions from our audience. Though I will say there is also an outpouring from our community in the audience saying, always ask your questions in class. Everybody wants to know. So we have talked a lot today, and it has come up in the questions that folks are submitting about equipping students with AI literacy skills, because after you leave Columbia, you will go off into a world that is increasingly AI adjacent, perhaps even more than AI adjacent. And that workplaces, we had a panel right before this talking about workplace readiness and how crucial AI judgment calls or skill building is to moving beyond the university and into the world. And so I am curious, when we've been talking about AI in your classes and your use of it or not using it, or the ways that faculty are talking with you about it or not talking with you about it, when it is incorporated into a curriculum, do you feel like you're having conversations about, like, how this will benefit you going forward, or how the place of AI within a discipline, or when you leave Columbia, AI will be part of the career or discipline that you go into. And do you feel prepared in that way once you leave? Please.
To be transparent,
I don't know if it's on either. Let's see. Try it again.
To be transparent, in my undergrad, I was just told so many times, like, no, don't use AI, they're not going to want it. And I went into one of my first internships at a large corporate company, and one of the first things my manager said is, before you send an email, make sure AI reads it. Before you give me the sprint planning, like the sprint planning doc, make sure AI's gone through and approved it. And I was shocked because I was like, my teachers always say, don't use it. It's limiting my thinking, which I do agree in a lot of sense. It does limit your thinking. But I think going into the workplace nowadays, based on your field, like if I were going into the arts or if I were going into acting, I wouldn't want AI. I wouldn't want AI because that's, again, emotion, personalization, and there's like a psychology that AI just isn't gonna have. But going into a tech field, I guess nowadays AI is just the center of it. So figuring out how to use it as a tool, and like I really do wish now for my teachers to, show me how I can use it to strengthen my work. Mm-hmm. So take my ideas and strengthen it. Like my thesis professor, he'll be, something that I really like is he said, write this on your own and then go in AI, and then take that output, because it's a cleaner output. That's probably what you'd want to present, but it's your ideas, it has your individuality, and that's something I've seen in the workplace as well, and so I think that's kind of helped.
Interesting. Let's just go on down the line.
I think one of my favorite ways to use AI is as a grad student, there's a lot of pressure to present and to submit papers. And, I've written this entire 10-page paper and then I don't submit because they ask for a 1-paragraph abstract. And what I've found really useful from a professor that I worked with at Teachers College is, inputting your own work, your 10-page paper, and asking for a proposal, right? Asking for a proposal, what does that look like? What does that abstract look like? And going back into it, seeing if it's what I would like it to be, and editing it based on what that conference looks like, right? It takes out so much of the time of you condensing the information that you've already written, to go back and edit what you are doing to fit 10 different conferences, right? And I've been able to apply to so many more conferences and so many more papers and journals because of that. Because every proposal asks for, add 2 questions, or 2 questions that you have in your research, or add what is your research centered around and how does it work towards this conference. So it really helps in getting out my work to get the feedback, to get the answers way faster, because a lot of times conferences really don't get back to you. But also, when I was doing my Bachelor's of Philosophy dissertation at Pitt, one of the ways I used it was to structure my research. So make me a table of the 45 different books that I've been using for this certain paper, and I want you to organize my notes. Put the author, put the title, put my analysis and my description there. Make me a table. And it comes out in 3 minutes. And I'm able to kind of condense my thoughts that are already on my paper, I think in word bubbles and different mind maps, which isn't really helpful when you're going back to it, I've found out. But using AI, it's really structured my thinking so that I'm able to reference back to this resource when I am writing my paper, when I am doing my bibliography, because that is one of the most pickiest things to do. But yeah.
Thank you.
As much as I don't like using it, I do enjoy that it's a skill set that we'll have to learn at some point. Even if you don't, example, Microsoft Suite. I don't personally use it, but I know how to use it because you kind of have to. Some jobs just expect you to come in with that knowledge. And I think it's, AI literacy is becoming one of those skills that you just have to pick up at some point, whether or not you plan on using it, don't want using it, or will use it, just because it's going to be, and it is currently being integrated into our lives at such a rapid pace that it's kind of hard to not be and just be left unequipped. Because like, even if you don't want to, at least knowing how to handle it will help you in that aspect as well. Knowing how it can be applied, how it can't be applied, how it should or shouldn't be applied based on personal merit, but also in terms of a workplace. It's not something to, I don't think that you could skip over anymore. The same way as like how many years ago did you not have to know how to make an Excel spreadsheet? But now it's just like, okay, learn how to do it because that's what you do. Like I used to work at a resource center and we offered classes in that, like learning how to use the Microsoft Suite specifically, because it was such a core part of getting a job at some point. And in very specific jobs that just demanded of you, regardless of if you're like, have a computer at home. Not everyone does. But having this like suite of skills, like including coding, that's another thing that's becoming more and more a relevant life skill these days. It's just knowing how to do minor coding, how code works, how to fix it up. And a part of that has to do with AI because it's becoming so relevant these days. So I don't think there's a way around it, but having to be literate in it, at least in an academic sense, or at least learning in like a very childish sense or arbitrary sense, is important in and of itself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jeanne?
I feel like my answer is going to be pretty short because I don't think I have any class in which AI has ever actually been allowed for me, especially back in France. It was totally forbidden. And in here, in most of classes, it's the same. So I've never had a class in which I really had to use it. I used it because I feel like everyone does it anyways, whether it be for research or to ask questions for which I didn't have answer. And as much as I would love how to use AI and how it will be useful in my future career, I feel like it's also hard for teachers to try to teach it because everyone is learning at the same time at the moment, and no one really knows what's going to happen and how it's actually going to have to be used. So I think we all want to know more, but no one can actually teach it because no one knows enough to teach it properly. So.
Yes, thank you. That is an ongoing, I would say, one of the themes of our day together. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective. Today and even the last few years have demonstrated that Columbia is an institution that's dedicated to thinking through AI and reimagining what teaching and learning looks like in the age of AI, and always with this student experience at the center, right? The whole idea is fostering learning and providing students with an environment where you can thrive. And we can't do that without your input and your perspective. And we get that in a lot of ways. This is just one of them, but we are so grateful to you for joining us today. Please join me in thanking our students one more time. I will now take off my moderator hat and put on my MC hat and let you know that we will take a 15-minute break. Let me make sure that I'm getting that right. And that we will be back for our final session of the day, starting at 5 o'clock for a debate with the Columbia Debate Society titled, "In an Age of AI, Will Universities Become Obsolete?" Stick around to find out.